dream where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my only shrine. What other hosts in other lands I redeem, with hopes and dreams as true and high as my countryside, the ocean and sunlight beams on over sea and pine. But lands I've sung and over skies and as smooth as I. Oh, hear my song, the nations, a song of peace for the land. Song of
Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. We are in our 4th to 5th day of Hanukkah. Here's a number of announcements for all of us. This is a week for the Senior Covenant Group, which has been meeting a little bit earlier than normal. They normally meet at 3. They're now meeting at 2 in the afternoon on Tuesday. That's one thing. We also have Seekers this week. We have my normal 11 o'clock Zoom call if anybody wants to check in on. We've got our deeper dive conversations at 1 p.m. Talking about racial issues. This is the last week for the holiday toy drive. We've had quite a bit of success. We've raised, I think it's somewhere around $1,500 for kids through Rainbow Services who are going to have a Christmas that they otherwise might not have. So if you haven't contributed to that and want to, please do. Next week, we're going to do a benefit for One Voice. We're going to try to do a split plate for One Voice, which has been a great event for us to attend in the past, where we all gather up in Santa Monica. And for a frenzied couple hours, we put food together. I called it the most fun volunteer thing I ever did for about an hour and a half, worked my tail off. But we're going to support some of the hungry folks around LA with a split plate next week. What else is going on? Let's see. We started a Wednesday call, particularly designed for people who are less connected than others at 3 o'clock. We want to do that in person, but COVID's just going a little bit too hard, and just a number of people we haven't reached with pods and different adventures we're on. We just had our second adult ed on the Christian scriptures at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. Next Saturday is the last of those. I think as we move forward in the world, I'm going to try to make that 10 o'clock Saturday morning thing a more regular part of our lives. I think it's a nice piece to add, particularly while we can't gather back together again. And so there we are. Let's see. What else is there news? That's a lot of news. Dan Dempster has been kind enough to host a Zoom 7 to 7:30 meditation night every night of the week through the holidays and probably long beyond. So, lots still cooking at the church, even though as we try to be physically distanced, but socially connected. So, there we go. I'm going to like to invite up our own Tracy, who's going to read our chalice words while I light the chalice.
Hi. We are religious because we are born and we die. We are religious because we know not what came before any more than we know what comes after. We are religious because all legitimate expressions of that truth demand awe and humility.
Thank you, Tracy. You, Reverend David Tashahaki Morris says, something deep inside of us calls us to notice the light at this time of year. I think we all do. I bet you've noticed yourself drawn to lighting even more than normal as the sun darkens itself at, close to 4:30 now. It's almost too even obvious to say. And there's around this area here, there's a neighborhood in Torrance. I had never been before. It's kind of famous for its lights, its Christmas lights. And I saw amidst the dark houses, there's sort of this electric Christmas light. We're celebrating Hanukkah, which is the festival of lights. And there's almost every celebration historically has a connection to light at this time. So I turned this corner. I mean, this is an experience we all have. I wouldn't say it's particularly holy experience, but it was an amazing experience. It was very Santa meets disco ball effect in the middle of the pandemic. It made me smile, and that experience is deep and old. I'm going to invite Trace to come up and light our Hanukkah candles up here, and she's also going to, I believe, light them for our children's moment down there. But in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly, right, this only works when you're on this side of the equator, the north side of the equator. Culture after culture across recorded time have fought and attended to that primeval urge to bring light into the darkness. It's why Christmas is centered at this time of year. If you step back through history in the way that Jung would describe it, it's archetypal to go towards the light in the dark. And today we tell one of those old stories about light in the darkness, the classic tale of Hanukkah. And I'm going to bring that tale of Hanukkah in a new, modern, kind of spirited way. If you remember last week, the Buddha went on a late night talk show. This is kind of Hanukkah as if it were Live Aid. So I hope that works. And it was fun to write. And there we go. All of that pleasure follows Severin and a hymn. Sing along at home.
Sing with me.
This is the celebration of Hanukkah, the festival of light. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about a miracle. This is a miracle. And then there are things that seem like they're miracles, but somebody says, oh, I know why that happened. They have an explanation. Or you think about science, look at science. Science has an explanation. Generally speaking, there's explanations for most of anything. But nonetheless, sometimes a little part of you says, yeah, that explains it. I think something else. I wonder if this was kind of a miracle. So that's one of the things that we celebrate about Hanukkah, the festival of lights. And today is the 4th day of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is a celebration of a miracle, or at least what people thought was a miracle, because there was a group of people who were fighting to go ahead and fighting for the right of their community to worship the way they wanted to worship, to gather the way they wanted to gather, much like we gather in here. They had a temple, and the people who didn't want them to gather and didn't want them to believe what they wanted to believe destroyed that temple and destroyed the things in it. And finally, after years, this group of freedom fighters took this temple back, and they were able to put in their symbols. And the very first night they were back in there, they wanted to light the light so that the people of the village knew that they had taken their temple back, and that they could be free again. And they looked around for their menorah, which was a symbol of their faith, and they needed oil to light the light. But there was only just a little tiny bit of oil left. And they thought, geez, this isn't going to last very long. So they waited until it was dark, and they lit the oil, and it lasted into the night. And then the next night, there was a little oil left. So they lit the candle again, and it stayed lit all night. And 8 days later is when that light finally burned out, when that oil finally ran out. So people look at that as a miracle. How did that oil last all those days? I'm going to light the candle on the menorah. So you could see if it lasted only 8 days, why are there 9 candles? And the answer to that is because the middle candle is called the shamash candle. And that's what we use to light the others. And we only light the amount of days that we're on Hanukkah. So we're not at the 8th day yet. We're just at the 4th. And there's a Hebrew prayer that goes with it that some people sing. But I really like you all. So I'm not going to sing it. I'm just going to say it for you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kadashanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzavanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. And so the Festival of Lights is celebrating the freedom fighters, bringing that community's ability to cherish what they wanted to cherish back to the people. So not only were the candles lit, but people like to have a little bit of fun. And part of that having fun was to play and goof around, as that always seems to be a great way to celebrate. And I know you've heard of a dreidel before. They say the song is dreidel made it out of clay. I don't have any clay dreidels. I have some wood ones. I have a plastic one. I have pretty colored ones. And there's a game. And the game is that you put some money out, and you get 2 or 3 people in your family to play, put some money out in the middle there. And each side of this dreidel has a symbol on it. Gimel, Nun, Shin, and Hey. Those mean something in Hebrew. And what they mean is if I spin this dreidel, well, that wasn't very good. Hang on. Here we go. And it fell on hay. And hay means I get half the pot. So far, I'm really liking this game. Then the other person gets to spin it, and they spin it. I'm the other person, by the way. And it says Gimel. And Gimel means you get the whole pot. Okay, it doesn't always work out that way, but since it did, I'm going to stop right there because I won. But when you're done playing the game, my favorite thing to do is to see how many dreidels I can get spinning all at once. And if I had a floor, I could show you that I could spin them really far because I've played way too much dreidel. So I'm just going to like many. Oh, they knocked. And then the other part of Hanukkah that's so fun is latkes. Potato pancakes? You've had potato pancakes. So latkes are fried potato pancakes, and traditionally you eat them with applesauce and strawberry jam and a little bit of sour cream. So if that sounds really icky to you, try it next time you have a potato pancake. It rocks. So if you don't have a dreidel of your own, and spinning a dreidel sounds like it might be fun for you, you can call me, text me, email me, or email the church, and I'll give you one of my dreidels. Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you, Tracy, and happy Hanukkah to all you kids. Leanne is going to light our joy and concern candle. We just hope everyone has a great holiday, and those who are facing medical challenges and economic challenges feel held. Let's just take a moment before our prayer, which is very individualistic, right? This is collectively for all of us and the world. May we have a peaceful exchange of power in our country. May we have peaceful exchanges of power in our families. May we have as joyful a holiday as this, the medical situation, the pandemic allows. This is a prayer from Mary Oliver. It's a very personal prayer. It's we think of Hanukkah and the holidays as being collective time. We do things together. This is in the spirit of some things that we have to do ourselves. It's called the journey. One day you finally knew, Mary Oliver says, what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice through the whole house, it began to tremble and you felt that old tug at your ankles, mend my life. Each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full fallen of branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Sometimes the spiritual journey calls us to a certain selfishness and to save ourselves. Sometimes it calls us to broaden our hearts in other places. Being a full human being means embracing that. And we take that question and that thought of what is collective and what is deeply personal to this prayer time. Amen. Thank you, Seb. You might remember hearing about StoryCorps if you're an NPR fan. About a decade ago, I'm going to say they began doing their thing. And StoryCorps is the love child of a man named Dave Issei, or Issei, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And he believes that stories bind us together, and the stories have the power to celebrate and differentiate and sort of expand our shared humanity. I think we all know that instinctively. Stories, I have a friend who's a writer, and he always says, the particular is the universal. And I think that's beautiful. And it's in the most unique ways that our individual stories reach out to all of us and tell us how connected we are. About a decade ago, like I said, a traveling group of Americans went on the road listening to people tell their truth. And a lot of churches have done this. A lot of different groups have recorded seniors and different people. I mean, we're in a phase where we're hearing a tremendous amount of voices, new voices. It's a celebration. We're also hearing a bunch of untrue stories. The internet's brought both to light. But Dave Issei says, listening is an act of love. And I agree with that. Prompted indirectly by the rabbit hole of some of Nareesh's suggestions for me that he gives me for podcasts, I've listened to a couple of old podcasts, and it just came back to me as a memory. I've long thought about the patience to listen to one another's stories as not only an act of love, but an act of peacemaking as well. And that one of our traditions is that, as you use, we're sort of an interfaith glue. We have an amazing amount of multi-ethnic and multi-varied kinds of families that enter UU churches as the compromise to Catholic and Jewish families, or any number of types of ways. And it is in this spirit that I offer this particular Hanukkah message. But before I begin, I want to be clear. Hanukkah is not originally first or really anything about listening to others. I don't mean to represent it. Hanukkah begins and is for many Jewish people a holiday precisely about the unlikely victory of a bunch of underdogs who back in the day, a couple millennia ago, wouldn't listen and wouldn't acquiesce to the invading Syrians who had like Greek roots, and in violent reaction stood up to an empire that was oppressing them. That's what Hanukkah is about. It's about a miraculous bit of oil that burned to re-sacramentalize the sanctuary after it had been turned. But this is a different kind of Hanukkah message in a way. What I have for you is sort of a daydream, and I had this, it wasn't a nightmare, it was sort of a nightmare, I guess. I had this vision that I was sitting with a group of people who felt like church people, not particularly PUC folks or anyone, but they weren't differentiated as church people in a particular way, but I'm a minister and I was with church people, Unitarian Universalists. And we were watching a screen. It seemed to me like one of those sort of inflatable screens or like backyard projector screens that have risen up with the pandemic where people sit outside, they've strung a sheet. It felt like that. Dreams are funny. And it was images reminiscent of 9/11. That's sort of how I interpreted it in my awaking state. And I've been to the Korean DMV, so there were violent images on this screen that we were all sort of being exposed to. It wasn't terrifying, but it was odd and it was disturbing. I think it relates, my interpretation that it relates to sort of election fallout and the fears that things might not go peacefully, right? When reflecting on this, it also, just in my awakened state, it reminded me of Live Aid. So we were people watching something from afar. And I remember back in the 80s, we heard about this famine in Africa and we all sort of watched it on the evening news. And then, suddenly these series of concerts, one in London, one in Philadelphia, rose up called Live Aid. If you're anywhere near my age or, older, you'd remember it. And so this is my sort of Live Aid version of Hanukkah. It's a follow-up to that Nightmare in Discord. This is a dream, right? This was a daydream. It wasn't part of my dream. And in this daydream of mine, the Parliament of World Religions and the United Nations and Amnesty International and the Gates Foundation and many of the world's churches, temples, covens, all of it, have decided to host a worldwide festival lifting up Hanukkah. the violence and discord of the American election sort of softened us all up in this dream of mine or imagination of mine that we needed to listen to one another like StoryCorps and make that a priority. Finally, we were going to, as a species, kind of in the way the World Parliament of Religions came together in the late 1800s to sort of be together. And there's sort of like a World's Fair feel to this whole thing. Finally, as a species, we were ready to experience just one particular faith experience as part of the cornucopia of human religious experiences. So Hanukkah was going to be the choice for this, and it was an effort to spread tolerance. So on the world stage, little old Hanukkah would be honored for its uniqueness, but also for the ways in which it was universal. The logo for the event would, of course, be a menorah like this one, but it was set in a canopy of the religious images, something like if you were here at PUC, we used for the images of the World Religion Seminar we did last year. Set above the earth with the globe, that great image of the earth from space, religious images, and then a menorah. This collective hope was sponsored by various different people, and it was designed to soften us up that one expression of religious life could be seen as universal, could even be one part of a broader puzzle. So rather than, interestingly enough, picking a Jewish leader to market this, the global conveners of this event, all those UN voices and all the World Parliament of Religions, they decided they would let the Dalai Lama and Pope Francis and Andrea Merkel, the German chancellor, be the pitch for this special event. Germany, with its, ugly history of World War II in relationship to the Jews, kind of a desire to be peaceful, right? The Catholic Church has had some connections to the Nazis, and we thought we'd bring it back together and try to bring the world together. So the Dalai Lama says in his soft voice, we heard a little bit from him last week, this event is going to be something of a mammoth, high-tech, we are the world kind of thing. And you could love, the Dalai Lama's face is there. And on Twitter feeds and on TV screens, we see Pope Francis surrounded by a gaggle of Jewish kids with beanies in front of him, with a menorah in front of him. The German recent leader tweeted, it's designed as pitched as a modern do-over for the Tower of Babel moment where all of humanity gathered together and couldn't cooperate because they couldn't speak the same language. And they decided to sort of assert their way to heaven. This was going to be a collective way to communicate and cooperate. The event's pitch materials for this describe it. On this day, we put away the bulldozers and cranes that could build a tower to God, and rather than assert our authority, we listened attentively as an act of love. The magic value of listening was a tagline. Another common theme in the advertising for this worldwide Hanukkah cornucopia was that today, finally, the world begins to share its diverse spiritual heritage with itself. At this global event, widely podcasted and broadcasted and telecasted and tweeted and streamed and blogged about, the major tech companies have cooperated to allow everyone around the world through all those mediums to be the only thing that was available. Hanukkah was going to be the only thing broadcast for these just couple hours. At this odd Hanukkah time celebration, every tradition would eventually have its little moment, but this was really going to be about this one slice. A candle on the menorah, in this case, was going to be lit for every world religions, and one extra for the atheists and secular humanists that Bill Maher was going to light, and he promised to be even polite for a moment. Backstage at the event was this fun buzz. There were brown-cloaked Benedictine monks there from the Irish Isles, and they were swapping meditation practices with the medical professionals from India. In trailers donated by Warner Brothers that served as temporary green rooms, masked elders from the Borneo jungles, shamans, were talking to Native American like chiefs from South Dakota about different practices, right? Captured behind the scenes were different people talking about how their climate, how their very geography had shaped their religious histories. Across a folding table covered with sacred cloth near the parking lot, Chinese spiritual leaders were performing Reiki on Joel Osteen's feet. We tune in just at a time in which the Tibetan monks are stepping off stage, having provided just a short set of their amazing guttural chants. Also backstage, Da Vinci author Dan Brown was milling around looking for fodder for a new international book of conspiracy, while a coven of witches, Sylvia, was there, and she is scheduled to speak about how religious feminism and modern paganism have come together in new ways. In an hour after the Hanukkah piece, Sufis from Ireland, of all places, were going to be slated to spin their transcendent little dance out on stage for the world to see. And they were limbering up their necks with their little hats on. And everybody began to admire that there had been some art project where different people had decorated menorah-like chairs, and people were sitting around on those, designed for the event. Backstage, an interesting collection of Jewish voices are preparing to collectively explain to the world how Hanukkah works. Even Jerry Falwell's son was invited to deliver a prayer. Yeah, Jerry Falwell's son. And he surprisingly accepted the invitation, right? It was not hardly a fundamentalist moment, but it had become bad form and a lost opportunity not to speak to the world, to turn down this 21st century modern Hanukkah moment. Falwell finishes his prayer, and when he does, a flourish of flowers were thrown on stage. He was excited, and a celebratory namaste that a group of Unitarian Universalist teens had taught the crowd to applaud with. Small tears form in Falwell's eyes as he witnesses the sea of mixed faith gathered before him. When he sees his face tearing up on the Jumbotron, he is speechless, and that never happens. Carrying out a simple modern-style menorah that was also filmed and projected onto these big Jumbotron screens, was a representative from a small Jewish community in Argentina of Jews, walks out on stage. Up close to the stage, mingled together on long chairs, were Filipino Muslims. There were Christians from China around, and there were Nation of Islam representatives from Chicago there as well. It was an amazing day. The Torah scholar from Argentina gently steps up to the microphone and begins speaking. He says, "You might be familiar with the menorah." I'm not going to do the accent. "And a picture of it is in your program and above your head. And this is booming out to millions of HD TVs around the world. The 8-pronged candelabra," the Argentina says, "this menorah, lighting of the candle of it symbolizes the blessed miraculous oil that burned for over 8 days, although there was just a tiny bit left, purifying and reconsecrating the Jewish temple almost 2,000 years ago. This oil," the rabbi voice echoes across the open field, holding up a small symbolic bottle of it himself, "symbolizes the liberation of the Jewish people in 164 BCE. On this holiday, a rebel group of my people historically liberated the temple from foreign occupation. They were the Maccabees. The very word Hanukkah means dedication or reconsecration of the temple." He's nervous. He's in front of billions of people around the world, but he's excited about the opportunity. This is being beamed from satellites everywhere. In order to add perspective, a soldier from the Israeli army was invited, a woman. Like I said, it was an odd day, a mix of people. Dressed in a camouflage outfit, she walks on stage to join the Argentinian. Up to the microphone, she says, "The central drama of Hanukkah centered around a priest called Judah, who was brilliant and strategic as a military strategist. His nickname was the Hammer. And he directed a small band of indigenous Jewish fighters to liberate the central temple in my home country of Israel. Like many overpowered groups around the world, they resisted formal battles and resorted to guerrilla warfare." She says the candles in part asked Jews now around the world to remember the often difficult lengths we're all called to keep our faith. I suspect many of you from different faiths can identify with that struggle. Those who originally set out to simply reclaim the religious freedom of the temple, however, found that they had gathered enough momentum to continue a national vote for self-determination. The soldier steps aside. Politely, another Jewish rabbi, a trained sociologist, comes forward from the Reform tradition, steps up to the microphone. She fleshed out that it was important to understand that the Maccabees were essentially rural revolutionaries, and they were incensed that their own fellow countrymen had gotten so corrupted by the invading Greek armies that they allowed a statue of Zeus into the holiest of holy places. That's part of the Hanukkah tradition. Zeus was in the Temple of Temples in Israel. As you might imagine, the idea of a lightning bolt throwing God was an abomination to loyal Jews. She said that in the Talmud reports that there was even the sacrifice of pigs in the temple during this time. So with revenge on their hearts and in self-righteousness that they had been pushed too far, the Maccabees attacked successfully. At this point, one of the many Unitarians in the vast audience, a formal sponsor for this event, turned to her son and she said, "Son, I want you to know that we UUs have a strong allegiance with the Jewish people. You should know that we Unitarians were, for much of our history, critiqued by more strict Christians and accused of being Jewish because our questioning of the Trinity put us in alliance with the Jewish people." Back on stage, Judaism as a religion, like all religions, has had a trying political life. It often tries to shy away from glorifying military and political victories. And because civil war between the Jews was seen as deplorable, the Maccabees who eventually took power, that story isn't pure or clean for us. The Argentinian rabbi returns to the spotlight and says, even shortly after the event that prompted Hanukkah, there were those who wanted to move it away from its historical roots, its story a little sullied if you follow it along further away. We took it and claimed it to be the miracle of the oil. The soldier stepped forward to the mic at this point. Over time, oil became not only a symbol for the event, but a metaphor for all the miraculous survival of the Jewish people over the millennia, all the trials and tribulations that they had successfully gotten through. Michael Lerner, a leader within the progressive Jewish movement and founder of the publication called Tikkun, was handed the microphone. As a modern Jewish leader, to me and many Jews, the real miracle of Hanukkah, he says, is that those relatively powerless people were able to stay loyal to their vision of hope. And it had inspired them to against overwhelming odds, to preserve their faith as they understood it. Again, many of you are fighting your own fights for courageous freedom. Lerner says, when that kind of energy, what religious people call the Spirit of God sometimes, becomes an ingredient in the consciousness of ordinary people, the same radical hope is spread. Whether rooted in religion or in a secular belief in making the world a better place, a place of justice and freedom, that radical hope is celebrated here today in Hanukkah, and I hope in your hearts. There was both an excited and a polite clapping. Cries of namaste rang across the crowd. The Jewish contingent began to walk off stage, handing the stage to the well-known pagan feminist, Carol Christ. She said, "Wow, thanks for sharing that. What a tale." More clapping. I suspect it's also true to say that Hanukkah is set at the darkest time of the year. The increasing candlelight each day recalls the customs and instincts of earlier rituals hearkened to call back the sun. Let's today claim them to be in one spirit. One of the rabbis stepped back towards the microphone and spontaneously said, "Yes." As it turns out, our tradition long overlooked that. But part of the miracle of the modern age is the historical perspective. And we within the Jewish community are seeing with a broader and longer perspective than we ever had before. Many of us over the last few centuries have chosen to see how uncomfortable and being blinded by the idea of being the chosen people are for both us and others. More cheers from the crowd. Professor Christ is speechless. A descendant from Rabbi Isaac Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, spontaneously stood and asked if he could offer words from his grandfather, the closing words. He is granted that permission. He said, "My grandfather used to say there is one who sings the song of his soul, discovering in his soul or her soul everything, utter spiritual fulfillment. And then there is another who sings the song of their people, emerging from the private nature of their own soul as not expansive enough. Not yet tranquil, they strive for higher heights. And then there is one whose soul expands until it extends beyond the border of Israel, singing the whole song of humanity. His spirit spreads, aspiring the goal of humankind, envisioning its consummation. And there is one who ascends with all these souls in unison, the song of the soul, the song of the nation, the song of humanity, and the song of the cosmos resounding together, blending in harmony, circulating the very sap of life, the sound of holy joy." The rabbi says, "I believe we are beginning that ascent here tonight." You could hear a pin drop across that vast stage, and a wave of empathy was still in the air. On stage, in the audience, everyone breathed in this holy, ecumenical moment. After a pregnant pause and the people departed from the stage, the well-known Jewish American comedian walked out. At this poignant moment of goodwill, he said, "I have a joke to tell you. I believe it explains the essence of Hanukkah and essentially all the Jewish holidays to all the nations of the world in 9 words. You tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat." There was a moment of uncomfortable tension at the joke, and then a laugh erupted from the crowd that gave everyone a hint that maybe those days are over. That is my Hanukkah dream. Amen. Tracy's going to come up and get us started with our offertory humor.
A little girl was sitting on her grandfather's lap as he read her a bedtime story. And from time to time, she'd take her eyes off the book and look up at his face, reach up and touch his wrinkled cheek. She was stroking her cheek as well. And then she finally said, "Grandpa, did God make you?" "Yes, sweetheart," he said. A long time ago." She was stroking her own cheek and she said, "Did God make me?" And he said, "Yeah, God made you just a little while ago." She looked at him and she said, he's getting better at it, isn't he?" Please give generously.
Here's a song by Jacob Bruskin Gershowitz, otherwise known as George Gershwin.
This church is dedicated to the proposition that beyond all our differences, beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Blessed be. And now our service truly begins.
We know that people have been stuck inside for a while. So we changed the lyrics of the song a little bit, and we got the lyrics from Play It Again, Sam and Diane on YouTube. Thanks. I really can't stay. I've got to go away. These past weeks have been so very long. You really don't have to worry. I'm tired of the pace and the cold. So really, I'd better scurry. Well, maybe just to have a drink more. This cool routine stinks. Say, what's in these drinks? I wish I knew